Okay, so we're going to get started today. My name is Jason Rubin. I'm the head of content at Oculus. I have four fantastic panelists with me here today. We've got Vicki Ferguson from Ubisoft. Their title is Eagle Flight. Robin Hunicke from Funomena. Title is Luna. Matt Boch from Harmonix, Rock Band VR. And Jesse Schell from Schell Games, creative name for the company. I Expect You to Die is the title. So earlier in our keynote, which I hope you all saw, Mark mentioned that Oculus has been quite a large investor in the VR ecosystem. We've spent over $250 million to date, and I'm pretty darn sure, but I'm getting absolute confirmation that everyone on stage right now was a beneficiary of some of those dollars. And we're looking forward to investing in many, many more titles over the next few years. And so if you get inspired to reach out to us, we would love for you to do that. We really don't play favorites, and we want everybody to succeed. So we have a lot to spread around, and we'd love to work with you. I thought we'd start today. We're going to talk, by the way, about developing in VR and what this group of people has learned and what they may do to help you jump forward in VR, because it's very different than every other medium. I thought we'd start, Vicki, I'll start with you, maybe telling us a little bit about Eagle Flight, just so everybody knows what we're talking about out there. If you have not seen it, all of these titles are available to demo in the pick and play section on the show floor. So tell us a little bit about Eagle Flight, maybe what you did on the project, just general.
Okay. Well, I'm the lead programmer on Eagle Flight. It's a game where you fly as an eagle over the city of Paris. We have a story mode, and we also have a 3 versus 3 multiplayer mode, which we're showing right now. It's kind of like capture the flag, except for you're capturing like a little rabbit and bringing it back to your nest. So yeah, I guess it's a game where you're flying basically using just your head. The controls are really intuitive, and it's one of the only games I've seen that's over a huge city and going really fast and still pretty comfortable.
Okay, Robin, Luna?
So I'm Robin Hunicke. I'm the CEO of Funomena, and I'm also the designer of Luna. And Luna is a game that focuses on a fully embodied experience. It's a storytelling game. It's a story game, a fairy tale in a way, but it's also a creativity and musical application. So in the game, a bird is leaving its nest to make its own nest for the first time, and it gets called away from that activity by an owl that convinces it to swallow the last piece of the waning moon. And when that happens, the world is blown off course. Everything is scrambled and frozen in time. And so in the demo, if you see it here, you find the bird lost and you help it unscramble its memories. And then you use the pieces of those memories to build the world back up in a little terrarium. And then the bird can call forth some help from another animal in the forest. And so the focus of the title is really looking at embodiment and creativity in the space. And very similar to other titles that I've worked on, just kind of pushing the boundaries of what we expect games to be.
Matt?
I'm Matt Boch. I'm the design lead on Rock Band VR. Rock Band VR is a reinvention of guitar gameplay in Rock Band, kind of centering aspects of creativity and performance while maintaining a pretty rigorous, very musical type of new gameplay. It's pretty difficult to explain, but it's a thing that I would encourage you to get your hands on. It's the closest experience I think we've made to really feeling like you're on stage. I have some experience playing in rock bands myself, and it's the closest thing that I've experienced outside of actually doing it. We're super excited about that gameplay.
Cool, yeah, so Schell Games is creating I Expect You to Die, a game where you are the world's most incompetent spy trying to escape from a series of death traps created by the evil Dr. Zor. Also, you have telekinesis.
What I love about this is we're a year and a half or so into actually being able to develop for Rift, really getting Rift dev kits. And you have 4 totally different games up here. And you all took an incredibly different approach to get to what you decided was what everyone out there absolutely must have first, right? Because for most of you, this is your first game. So Let's start with Vicki. So Eagle Flight is, it stood out to me the first time I saw it, and I told Olivier, who's the lead designer of this, as a groundbreaking moment in VR, because we have this challenge with Locomotion, and Eagle Flight does a lot of really interesting things to mitigate that. I wouldn't say reduce it to zero, but to mitigate it. You are a flying eagle, flying through Paris, through sewers, around trees, over buildings, and doing other things. First of all, tell me a little bit about the tunneling system that you created and how you came up with that. And then we'll get into maybe some of the other things that you did to try to really push Locomotion forward. And I do believe these technologies are applicable to a lot more games than Eagle Flight.
Yeah, definitely. So the tunnel vision system is basically a system we set up to try to reduce motion in the peripheral. So I guess as you heard in the keynote, we're really good at seeing things that are directly in front of us, but we're also really, really attuned to motion in our peripheral, and that can be distracting, and it can also cause nausea. So what we did is we decided we try to limit that peripheral. First, we did an actual tunnel vision system where the whole thing tunneled into the middle whenever you were getting close to things that might be moving in your peripheral. But as with a lot of things that we do to increase comfort in VR, there's sort of often a trade-off between whether or not something is comfortable and whether or not it's immersive. And we found that just tunneling really didn't help. So we came up with this parabolic tunnel vision system that just comes in dynamically depending on whether you're going near objects. So as you're flying through the city, as Jason said, you can go through tunnels, you can go around trees, you can go between buildings. And so when you're going between buildings, it just sort of comes up on the side. If you're going over top of something really close, I don't know if you guys have noticed this in other games, but if you have a lot of motion like underneath you, that can be a problem too. So we just, whenever something's gonna be close to you, we cover it. And it's cool because a lot of people don't notice it's happening until they see it on the screen.
And you told me there were a couple other subtle things you do. Can you share those with the audience?
Yeah, sure. So the first thing is in our game, you always look where you want to go. So the user's always in control of where they're going, and being able to have those expectations about where you're going really helps with comfort. The other thing we're doing is we're trying to work with the inner ear as opposed to against it. So as you guys may know, a lot of nausea may come from your inner ear not agreeing with what you're seeing. So what we're doing is if we want to make quicker turns, instead of like turning around and falling off your chair, and we have this tilt system, so you tilt like an eagle, and that sort of engages your inner ear in a way that you expect to be banking like an eagle. And so we've had a lot of pilots come to play the game actually yesterday too, and they said it's pretty intuitive for turning around. And because your inner ear is engaged in that process, you don't feel as uncomfortable.
It's amazing stuff. You really have to try it. And I think it's going to become kind of foundational in the way that we handle Locomotion. So as you were doing that, Robin was taking emotional, and she was saying, okay, I know how to do emotional in 2D, and we know you're famous for that. What were the challenges in bringing that to VR? What were the challenges in bringing it to the platform?
Yeah, so if you've ever heard me talk about the work that I did on Journey, you know that one of my favorite words is juicy. I like juicy feedback. The term that I use for VR is cashmere. So when you go to a store and you look at a sweater and you touch it and it's a kind of a cheap polywool blend, it feels kind of scratchy. And when it's cashmere, you know as soon as you touch it that it's going to be expensive because it's really nice. And in VR, when you touch something and it doesn't react, it feels hollow, it feels fake, it feels not real. And one of the things that we loved about the touch controllers when we first used them was the fact that there was this capacitant quality to the actual buttons. There was this feedback you could put on the controllers to make things feel more real. In Journey, you can build a beautiful world, and then you can take someone and show them one camera angle, and then you can cut to another camera angle. And you can hide things that don't work because you direct the user's gaze a lot of the time. In VR, you can't do that. They are the camera. And so this idea that you have hands and eyes in the space means that we really have to give you a lot more feedback. So developing really resounding emotional experiences in VR, in my opinion, takes a lot more thought about the sounds and the visual feedback that are filling the space We usually call that white space, and you want to have a little bit of space in a game, give you a chance to breathe and have feelings, but there needs to be a lot of feedback in VR, because if it's missing, it just feels transparent, it feels kind of hollow. And so one of the things we work on in Luna a lot is that feedback, and if you play the demo, you'll notice where it's missing. Like, I see where it's missing every day right now. One of the things that I think really will push the game over the edge in terms of its final finish is that last 2 or 3 months where we go back. We put a little bit of sparkle here, a little bit of vibration on the controller here, a little bit of a sound here, you know. The 3D audio stuff that we talked about at the keynote today, that was really great, you know. Anything that allows you to feel like you're in a real space is so critical. And it's actually one of the reasons why we're building something that's right in front of you, because just handling that in a little tiny terrarium is a lot.
Yeah, and it's been a difficult decision for developers where to stop, right? Because presence is easy to induce with the Rift, but it's incredibly easy to lose it if you do something wrong. So you're always fighting against, if I have anything that you can touch that you can't pick up, you'll lose it.
Exactly.
If I have anything that doesn't have a sound, when you knock it, you'll lose it. And so how do you make that decision? Because you can't do everything, right? You'd end up with one desk that you spent a year on.
No, it's so hard. It's so hard. So Scott Anderson, who's our VR programmer, he came on board, and the first thing that he did was he built some rocks that you can pick up. They're in the back of the terrarium if you find them, pick them up and throw them, and they bounce in the water. They hit things, but when they first went in, you could throw them and they would just land on the sun and just stay there. And I was like, yeah, no, you can't. It's kind of like in a really old adventure game if you implement rope or fire. Well, the minute that you have rope or fire, and you know, in a text-based adventure, that's the end of your game, because everyone's going to be using the rope and the fire all the time, and you're going to have to implement every single interaction. It's never going to work. So the rocks are that, you know, that an example for us in VR. And so what we did was we picked a very specific set of things they would do, and then we kind of hid them in the back. So they're there as a toy. I'm not sure we're going to ship them. We'll see. You'll all see when the game is done.
So Matt, let me skip you for a second, because Jesse, you're facing very similar issues, right? I mean, you're sitting in a vehicle. You've got all these things you can do. You can do so many more things than you could ever handle in every one of your areas. How do you solve that?
The answer is really simple. It's all about playtesting. I mean, playtesting is the way you get there. Because, yeah, you'd love to put everything, but it would make the costs, I don't know, everything would cost 10 or 20 times as much. But you have to put a lot, because you're not playing a game anymore. You're in a place, and it's real. And the expectations are that everything's going to be real. There's the expectations in normal video games are that things are going to be kind of flat and corny, and you're only going to work on the goals that game is about. But when you're actually in the space and there's an object there, you want to pick it up. So it's partly about being really selective and really careful. Like, it's a big deal, the question of, I'm going to put a screwdriver on the table, and it's like, oh my God, everything now changes because this screwdriver is present, and there's so many things. What, you know, are people going to use it to break glass? Because you'd expect that might work. All these sorts of things. And the way you get there is you play test. And if people try and do something and your game doesn't support it, you better put it in or take it out. Like, so just one of those two things. You can't just let it be there and be lame. Because anytime you have that moment where, oh, it's fake, everything is wrecked and everything is broken. And there's no point in doing VR if that's going to be there. But when you do that and you spend time on it, it's amazing.
You mentioned something to me earlier that I wrote down, brown boxing. Can you explain brown boxing? Because I thought that was genius.
Yeah, no, this was a technique that we came up with probably about halfway through I Expect You to Die. Of course, white boxing is really common in the industry. You know, you mock up a level with just kind of gray boxes, white boxes in Maya before you build it out for real, so that you get a sense that the spatiality of it is right. We realized that you could do that, or you could do something way faster, which is brown boxing. Our levels we build out of actual cardboard boxes, and we start playtesting them like, all right, we're building a submarine interior, get a whole bunch of boxes and let's make it. And should the switch be here? No, that's hard to reach. What if I put it here? Because since it's your real body, why not mock it up with your real body? And it saves a ton of time. And so we kind of have someone be a dungeon master hiding behind the boxes, so that when you pull a switch, like, the right things happen. And you can mock that up in an afternoon and change it 20 times. And if you get it so that you really like it, then make it digital. So start physical, then go digital in order to make something that seems real.
Yeah, we actually did that with Luna as well. We built a little terrarium out of just a bowl from Target and some hydrophilic sand that you can sculpt, and then we used Playmobil toys and Legos and built out the whole world. And I actually painstakingly went on eBay and bought every animal in the game as a little tiny Playmobil toy, and that they're at scale then. And so then you build the little world and you look at it from different angles. Glenn, actually, the art director, Glenn Hernandez, sculpted the hands out of clay. And you just, if it's physically in front of you, it's so true. It really changes the way you think about it. I would say that VR is a combination of sculpture and stage design and dance choreography in a way that a lot of game development just never has been.
That's really interesting. I've also seen people design in-game now, where they'll get a bunch of people into a level and they'll be like, we should have a window here because you'd be able to, and they're standing around in the game, looking through the game engine and talking about it as you would a set design for a movie, which you kind of never would have done that in the past.
Yeah, I mean, it happens sometimes in a lot of MMOs. It's not uncommon to do that within the game to a point, but to be able to point and touch and stretch and grab, it totally changes things, and I think we're going to see more and more of that.
That's awesome. Okay, so Matt, I was around for Rock Band VR, some of the early prototyping, and it was because it was a studio's title, and we went in and we're all sitting around and said, we're going to do this. This is going to be awesome. It's Rock Band. It's going to be awesome. And then we put Rock Band into VR and realized that beat matching, which will ship with the product, was not the ultimate way to do it. Which you had built a multi-billion-dollar franchise on the beat matching discs coming down and timing. So can you remind everybody of how that what the process was?
Yeah, totally. So I think one of the things that we took away from that process was that Rock Band gameplay is already exceptionally immersive. Like, you think back to the times when you're playing Rock Band, and maybe if you're the person who's singing, you have some memories of looking at your friends that are playing the drums or the guitar, and they're like entranced, and their eyes are barely moving, and that level of just intense flow state that Rock Band creates is visually induced, right? You need to be looking at one particular place in order to fall into that flow state. And what we found is that if we had people looking at one particular place, they didn't feel like they were on stage anymore. We'd done all this work of making an awesome venue and having a reactive crowd and having your bandmates want to forge relationships with these bandmates, etc. And all you saw was a television, essentially. It was like you were putting on this headset to go play the experience that you would have sitting in front of a TV. And so we started to push the game in more of a, I guess, an audio game direction, a more music game direction. I think the point in time in which I knew that we were successful in that design exercise was when I could play the game with my eyes closed. Now that sounds really strange, right? Like you're trying to transport yourself to this other place, why would you close your eyes? And I would not recommend anyone else close their eyes. But as the designer working on the gameplay, it was a revelation for me to realize that that was possible, because it meant that I could then spend a bunch of time being in the space, looking at the crowd, interacting with the other bandmates, and being present in a way that Rock Band gameplay just doesn't quite let you do traditional Rock Band gameplay.
Yeah, and it was an amazing process because we went in thinking you were going to play Rock Band, and we came out trying to make a game where you become a rock star. Right, so it's about the theatrical less than it is the technical.
Yeah, for sure.
And do you think that is that a VR truism or is that a Rock Band truism? Do you think?
I think it's hard to say. I think there are parts of the gameplay that are very performative, very much about being on stage, very much about enjoying the presence of the crowd, and we're rewarding you for things like motion and other things that we couldn't actually detect previously, but we'd always kind of been interested in. But we also have relatively rigorous gameplay. I would say that that the point of the gameplay is essentially that you're spending a fair amount of time becoming aware of the songs, aware of the song's contours, and so you still have, I think, a difficult technical system that you're interacting with, but that system incorporates aspects of your performance of this sort of rockstar simulator. And so we're excited about it in particular because it is a more musical game than past Rock Bands that we've made. Rock Band is a very rhythmic game, and we've made tons and tons of rhythm-oriented games. This is the first game where we're playing with knowing and being aware of the chord structure that a particular song has, and also reproducing particular rhythmic figures from your memory. So there's combos that you can do in the game. You're alternating between 2 chords every 2 beats, something like that. And you have to remember that and reproduce it in a kind of Tony Hawk's trick style way. So I guess I wouldn't say that VR is primarily performative because we've been able to make this complicated game in that space, but I'd say that that's enabled largely by the fact that the game happens in your perception of music, and we know that we can do so many other things while we experience and interact with music. We can run, all those sorts of things.
So the next question I'm going to ask you, and I think it'll tie into what everybody else is doing, is that there are no drums. And, you know, we expected drums, and then we started thinking about drums. Why no drums? Tell us about no drums, because it's a challenge that basically VR has, right?
Yeah, drums are really hard. I guess we haven't said, but the way that we get the guitar gameplay happening in Rock Band VR is we actually mount the touch controller to the headstock of the guitar, and then we can represent the guitar in the virtual space at an exact scale, and you can interact with it perfectly. When it comes to drums, there's this notion maybe of like, okay, we'll just use the touch controllers, right? We're just gonna like swing the touch controllers around in the air. But a huge amount of what allows you to play complex rhythmic figures on the drums is this tactile feedback that you get of the stick hitting the surface that you're playing with. And for us as musicians, weren't interested in making something that wasn't true to the performance of drum play, and that lack of tactility and the need to like track and understand a whole bunch of additional objects it's a daunting task. It's a thing that like we're interested in and certainly still thinking about, but it represents an enormous challenge.
Yeah, so the clip that goes on the guitar comes with every set of touch controllers. So it's in the box.
Yep, in the box.
And it'll allow you to put your touch controller on the guitar, and the guitar is one-to-one tracking at the quality of touch, which is amazing. We couldn't figure out how to do that with drums, and the lack of tactility, back to Jesse, how do you solve that? You put someone in a car or another room, and you say you got to get out, and you have hands that can go through things. And it's a huge challenge, again, going back to breaking immersion. Like, how do you handle that? And then, Robin, I'll get to you. Same question.
Yeah, I mean, tactility is a really interesting question. There's an ironic thing about having hand controllers in VR, and Michael Eibrecht touched on it earlier today. This question of, in the long run, is it going to be better for VR to have a hand controller that you physically hold, or will it be better to track an empty hand? And a lot of people's intuition is that the empty hand is better. But there's a big problem with an empty hand, which is that it has no tactile feedback. And so what we've found is for an awful lot of the things that you'd like to interact with in a world, having a controller actually is a pretty good substitute for that. If you wanna pick up a screwdriver or a gun or a champagne bottle, like, I'm squeezing the controller and getting a physical pushback from it because it's a physical object. It's pretty easy for your brain to map that into being a real physical object. And obviously it's not perfect, but it's not bad in that way. It's certainly worlds above anything we've had in video games before. And then, of course, if I've got this bottle and now I try and like push it through a car window, well, I'm not going to be feeling that. But one of the things that I think people don't realize, people think about sound design as if sound design is just about your ears and an oral experience. But in our brains, the areas that have to do with touch and tactility are connected up with the areas that have to do with audio. And so our brains are very good at substituting a sound for a touch experience. So if you ever type on an iPhone or something, and you have that little tip, 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 click, click, click noise that it makes, your brain is basically turning that sound into a touching experience. So a lot of our audio design was very much designed to simulate that tactility. So that can go a long way.
Yeah, I would actually, I totally agree. When we started working on Luna, actually, we were working with the Intel RealSense cameras, so I was very interested in this gesture in particular, which does have some feedback, and that when you do this, like if you're conducting with an invisible wand or you're painting with an invisible brush, the fact that you bring your 3 fingers together in this delicate way, you do feel it, and it creates a certain thing. And actually, when we first put the game into touch, one of my biggest concerns is the fact that the controllers have what we call a power grip. So the power grip is grab a gun, grab a bottle by the neck, that kind of a feeling. If you just do that right now, if you just reach out in front of you and do the power grip, you're engaging your thumb, your upper arm, your lower arm. There's a lot of actual physical response in your body, and it creates a feeling inside of you when you do this. I used to study Wing Chun, and you know that's famous for the 1-inch punch, where you like this, right? There's a lot of force in your arm and in the way that your arm is built that will punch someone in the jaw and really take them out. I mean, it's a very powerful body posture. So with Luna, what we wanted to do was we wanted to use a controller that had a power grip to create a feeling of delicate touch. And so there's a little bird in there, and when you pet the bird, you know, we wanted you to feel like you were really like sort of slightly petting it. And we've been getting a lot of feedback actually with this first, you know, iteration of our little tiny bird hands that are in there, that it's a little too pointy. People are a little bit afraid that they might poke the bird, you know? So there's a lot of things that you can do just through the modeling and the way that the controller responds to the touch to make it feel like a delicate grip, but it's a translation. It's something that you have to actually work on. So I've spent a lot of time in the design phase thinking about how do we create this body posture that is a grip and transform it into something that feels like this. And sound is actually one of the best ways to do it. And in the game, when it ships, there will be a slight when you do that. There isn't right now, and it's very obvious to me that it's not there. Now that I've said it, it'll be obvious to you too. But which will force everyone to get it done. This is one of those things, right, where when you put a little tiny sound, like Jesse's saying, it creates a delicate feeling in your mind. And the tenor of the feeling that VR allows is something that we can all think about. It doesn't have to be power. It can be delicate. It can be just a very slight brushing motion that makes the bird shiver and shake, you know, kind of like the Hillary shimmer, only a little different.
So, Matt, Jesse, and Robin, your games are generally speaking one-to-one locomotion, like the body controls the locomotion. Vicki, eagle flight, you're flying real fast like an eagle. So you have an additional problem in that you're flying real fast and you smack into a wall. How do you handle that, right? Because that isn't a subtle sound going to handle it kind of situation, right?
Yeah. So when we first started trying this out, I mean, there are a couple of options. One, you can just fly through things, and that's not super comfortable, and it's not really good for gameplay. So we started putting up a black screen right away so that, you know, and then transporting you somewhere else. But you felt it. You physically felt like you slammed into something, and it was really not very comfortable. So one of the things we did was we added these wind particle effects. So when you're flying through the city, it helps with the sensation of speed to feel like, the wind is flying by you. And then when you smack into a wall, you do get the black screen, but you still have the wind particle effects coming. So you still feel like you're moving forward. And not that you've stopped, it's just that you've been transported to a different location.
And that works.
Yeah.
It works really well. You should try it. I'm prompting, but I've played a lot of it. It's great. So one thing I love about game development is you give somebody this opportunity on a new piece of hardware, and your team started with 3 people. How do you come up with Eagle Flight as the game? Because you had a world of things you could have done, right? Each of you. How did you come up with Eagle Flight, the 3 of you?
Well, I think at first we had this mandate for, we thought the most interesting problem was how do you move around in VR? Because nobody had figured that out yet, right? So we started doing a lot of different things, trying to see if we could make something that would be a good walk controller. But our game director, Olivier Palmieri, who's sitting right here, he's always wanted to fly. He's always had these dreams of flying, so he wanted to try making a flight controller. And it sort of just went from there. And that was one of the cool things about having just starting with a really tiny team. We just tried everything we could think of, threw everything at the wall and saw what sticks.
Robin, every game I've ever made has been iterative. You come up with just totally new things how do you do that? How do you just say, oh, what we need here is, and then?
I think what we try to do is to work from the aesthetic goal backwards. So the feeling, I think the feeling of flight, which is very well captured in your title, is a feeling of freedom, right? It's a feeling of being able to see far and move through space with action, but also with grace, right? So it's a feeling that comes down to feeling control, but also freedom, right? And that's the trade-off in a design is the trade-off between the control and the freedom, right? Which is exactly what you were just talking about with the example of the wall. For Luna, a lot of games are about getting revenge, going back in time and fixing a mistake. And we were really interested in this idea that, like, as people, you can't do that. You can't go back in time and fix something that you messed up. If you make a mistake, it becomes part of who you are. And we've all done it. And the way that it becomes part of who you are is you learn to talk about it. You learn to be honest about it. Like, I have this problem. I had this childhood issue, or this thing happened, or, I was in New York at this time, when this horrible thing happened, and now it's part of my life. And so we really wanted to build something that was about, in a sense, transformation. And this idea of transformation actually turned into something very tactile, which is paper folding. So I did a lot of origami and a lot of paper folding, and eventually we started working on ideas for transforming space and transforming shapes. And we realized that while origami is very technical and very sort of, it involves a certain kind of transformation in your brain, that just playing with make-believe toys and building a little space, like whether that's like your Warhammer characters or a train set or dolls or Playmobil or Lego, that act of just placing objects in a space and arranging them, telling a story to yourself, is something that everybody is great at, and it's super fun. It's like a really delightful experience to do, and we don't really give ourselves permission to do it as we get older. Well, we do in this community, but not everybody does. So we wanted to share that with other people. I think that idea of transformation and being able to build a little world and then go down inside of it and see a story unfold on a stage that you made came from this idea of transformation. So it was really thinking about this experience, like, there's flight and control and freedom, right? And for us it was transformation, which is change and beauty, both of those things. And learning to talk about trauma or bad things that happen, because they always do, it's about change and beauty.
Was it a challenge for your team to move from 2D to 3D?
It was, and actually, I think when we
or VR.
Well, when we were building the game in Maya, we were spinning it around, looking at it every day, and thinking about how it was going to be on the PC. And then when we put it into touch for the first time, we were all blown away, just blown away. Wow, this is exactly how it looks in our imaginations. This is what we want to see. We really want to give people this experience. And then the next thought was, all those cutscenes and camera angles that we were planning, and all the storyboards we had for the whole narrative. We can't really cheat the camera. We can't do this like depth of field stuff. We designed this whole sort of paper box, like tracking the camera through using old Disney techniques, that kind of stuff. We're gonna have to chuck all that stuff and start over. And it was actually a pretty difficult conversation, because we're not flush. We're a very small studio, and actually it was Oculus support that helped push it over the edge and make us decide we can make this change, we can build this game, and then we can raise the rest of the money, because it will be awesome. There's not a lot of ways to convince people to believe until they've seen it,
Matt, let's skip you for a second, because Rock Band VR it was obvious to both of us. So, Jesse, you were one of the first games I saw. How did what's the decision process? Literally with a universe of things out there, because you didn't have much competition to even look at when you first dropped your game on the community. So what got you to your game?
Yeah, so I've been working on VR a long time. I started in '92 and have been working on it pretty continuously since then. First at graduate work at Carnegie Mellon, and then at the Disney Virtual Reality Studio, and then teaching at Carnegie Mellon. And so when VR finally was starting to emerge, I was excited, and then I was trying to get the studio excited, and the studio wasn't always completely excited at the beginning. So we were trying to find ways to get different people excited, and so we were trying these different experiments, looking at experiences we liked. And one of our guys who was kind of skeptical was coding up a VR demo, and I kind of encouraged him to try a thing with teleporting, because I'm like, yeah, we got to get past the locomotion thing. Let's try this teleporting experiment. And he didn't like the idea of teleporting, so he coded it in a way that you would do this speed up, slow down thing when every time you click the teleport point, and it was the most nausea-inducing thing I'd done in a long time. And I said, oh my God, you can't do it this way. This is really nauseating. And he's like, you know what? See, this is why VR doesn't work, right? And I'm like, no, you just can't do that. And he's like, yeah, look, when you put on the headset, you want to feel like a superhero. What kind of superhero gets tied to a chair? And then we all looked at each other and we're like, that happens all the time. But nobody ever made a game about it. And suddenly we were talking, it really sparked this idea that like, well, yeah, what if we made a game where you were kind of tied to a chair and you had to kind of MacGyver up a situation, and everybody got excited about that. And so that's how that thing got started.
That's awesome. And Matt, since Rock Band was it's like one of those games like the driving simulators where it was kind of made to be in VR, but there wasn't VR kind of thing. So what was the biggest challenge for your large team, because probably the largest team of all up here, to go into VR from a background in 2D games? The transition, what was the hardest part of the transition from a design standpoint, or however you want to slice that?
I mean, I think it was certainly gameplay. There's a way in which we've talked about like, oh, we're going to reinvent Rock Band for normal console games, and we're like, well, it's kind of perfect. Like we don't have any real problems with it, and it's like asking someone to reinvent Tetris. Usually, when you do that, it just kind of gets worse. But we were lucky that Rock had a core fantasy in its that was central to it, and that we'd been making such gorgeous stage shows for years, and getting to be actually in that space, it was super duper amazing. And I think in a lot of ways, how amazing it feels to be in that space can sometimes make it difficult to be critical of the work that you're doing in that space, and that's like a continual challenge that we have as a team for sure. And I think the reason that we ended up at the place we ended up was mostly because our team was flexible and was trying a lot of different things at once. We didn't ever have just one investigation that was occurring. We weren't just prototyping one thing. We were always prototyping too many things. And the core of this entire system was basically like brainstormed by our audio folks as like a fun diversion that you could do, a different way to play the game. We're just going to like make different sounds. And that experience was so compelling, we were like, okay, we have to figure out a way to make a game where you do this. And that's where we started building rules and started building that game system on top of it. But I think for us, it was really, really challenging to figure out at what point in time we should give up on any one of the investigations that we're doing. But luckily, you have those moments sometimes in game development where you're just like, oh, it's clear. Yeah, obviously we should do this. And that was the experience that everyone had playing our first instance of freestyle rhythm guitar. And that sort of built the basis for what the game is. So
Vicki, as a programmer, because you're, I think, the only full-time programmer up here, I don't want to. I'm sure some or all of us have programmed, but that's her job title. How do those challenges tie into the design? Like, how does that interplay? Like, did the design of Eagle Flight conflict with your abilities to program in any way? Or are there any challenges that you had to face in programming specifically?
Well,
I hope it's yes, because you asked those questions, it's with no.
Yeah, I think one thing that really affected it was our choice of engine. So Ubisoft usually uses their own internal engines, and none of them were VR ready for a team. Like 3 people were not going to make them VR ready in a very short amount of time. So we started prototyping in Unity. So that sort of changed the way that basically the tech that we were using when we started. Yeah.
And Eagle Flight's kind of an inspirational tale for anyone who's in a large publisher or working in a big organization that's like, this VR thing, they don't have 1 billion units. It's like mobile, we'll catch up later, buy $500 million worth of company somewhere. You started with a team of 3, and then what happened? Because Ubisoft got behind it.
Yeah, it's actually really cool. We were just we were 3 people, and we started to have people walk by and be like, "What's that? Can I try it?" And we started snowballing. More and more people wanted to contribute, even people that were helping out in their free time, just because it was so exciting. And I think so. Our game director was really key in trying to push. Hey, VR is not there yet, but it's going to be, and we need to be in a good place when it arrives. So we started making this prototype, and we ended up going to E3 with it, sort of as a like, hey, Ubisoft is doing VR stuff, check it out. And we got like such great feedback from that we're like, okay, so let's do this. It's so we actually became a full project, and we ramped up to where we are now, and now we release in 2 weeks.
That's kind of been the Oculus strategy. It's like, oh, we're working on this other game, VR maybe in the future. We're like, no problem. Just put one of these over here. Anyone can use it. And next thing we know, there's a side mode or whatever it is. Everybody loves it. So what have I missed about VR game design? Because we have, I think, about 20 minutes left. And I do want to open the floor to a few questions. Does anyone have anything I missed that they want to talk about specifically? Or should we do questions? All right, let's do questions. Probably micro, yeah.
Mike.
So I thought of this Rock Band in particular, but I think it applies to other games as well. Some games have started implementing kind of asymmetric gameplay where even if somebody's wearing a VR helmet, headset, that like to keep talking, nobody explodes, right? That someone else can be in the room and participate. And Rock Band, traditional Rock Band, that communal experience, it's not going to someone explodes in the dark. But then on the other hand, if you're wearing earphones, be really immersed in VR, getting that other sound from inside the room can break presence too. So did anybody give any thought to, asymmetric gameplay or, different roles in the game?
Yeah, we did some early experiments with asymmetric and I think asymmetric has some power and some importance, particularly as VR is new and people are kind of wanting to try it out, and you don't have 4 or 5 headsets in one room where you can kind of all be together. We tried some early experiments with that, but it's challenging, and it kind of adds extra layers of difficulty. But I do think that one of the things we're going to see in 2017 are more and more people doing experiments with that. I think one of the most important kinds of asymmetric play is going to be the networked asymmetric. Like we saw a little bit of that in the keynote this morning. Being able to mix in people who are playing on a tablet or on a phone or on a game console, connecting in with people who are in VR. So I think networked asymmetric is going to have the real power.
The climb has asymmetric in it, and that you can see the hands of yourself in the past or somebody else going up the mountain. And it's a really odd experience because they did it with their hands, and this is when it comes out with touch. So you actually feel like it's a human. Like you can tell that they're struggling and figuring out where to go, and it just looks oddly human, even though it's the floating hand. So asymmetric does work.
Actually, we have something like that in Eagle Flight too. We have a ghost mode. So if you go through our single player and you play again, you can see how other people did, and you can rank yourself on a leaderboard.
Does that telegraph the human playing it with the way that the head control works, or does it just look like an eagle? Like, I haven't seen the asymmetric, so it's an honest question.
It mostly looks like an eagle. I think it's just because your head is naturally doing the eagle motion, so you're not going to see necessarily, like if you look at like Toy Box or something, you can tell there's like human moving with hands, but yeah, because it has to translate into an eagle.
Yeah, in Toy Box you can actually tell who the human is, even if they don't talk, because you can tell how they move their hands in their head if you know them well enough. If you don't know them, of course you can. Anyone else for that one? Or?
Hi. Jesse, thanks for talking about like putting it in or take it out as far as the screwdriver. Totally understand that from building stuff. That, like you said, the budgets of building a real 3D world that's really interactable, that services what everyone imagines they might do with it, are just stratospheric. So one of the long-term things we've been looking at is algorithmic content generation. And I'd like if you all could talk about that, if it's in your strategy or some plans or just imaginations, and where you see that going and how that interfaces with narrative structure.
Yeah, actually, the next title that I'm designing now, actually, the one that I'm getting ready to pitch around, is it involves a significant amount of procedural generation, and it's also an asymmetric narrative experience. So I'm really trying to think about how individual people can move through a space that's generated by a black box, and explore that space and interact with it as part of a story that emerges about that space itself. I'm really interested personally in romance, and I wish there were more games that were about love, and like really about love, which is like very painful and difficult because it involves making yourself vulnerable to someone else, which is, involves looking at yourself in a mirror, which is that other person, and the ways in which love falls apart and the ways in which love can survive. And I've been really thinking a lot about this idea that in some ways we're all kind of procedurally generating our realities with our own frames and our own perspectives about other people and how they work and what they think of us and what they would like about us. You know, and you get up dressed in the morning and you're putting on that outfit for that special person at the office, you know. That's a simulation. And I've been thinking a lot about how a machine might be able to build a world for you to move through that slowly revealed a narrative about a romance, and that you could put a frame on that romance. But I think that's a really fruitful area.
Yeah, I mean, in video games in general, the question of procedural generation of content is always tricky because there are games where it works great. I remember the first one I ever saw, River Raid for the Atari 2600 people. I don't know if people realize that game was almost entirely procedurally generated, and it was amazing how subtle the difficulty curves were, like woven into the procedural generation. And we're having we're having conversations about it every day because one of the things we're hoping to do next is a VR MMO. And for a VR MMO, you need a big world. But at the same time, you want the world to be structured a certain way. And so we're having a lot of back and forth conversations about, can the whole world be procedurally generated? Do we need to build the whole world by hand? And I think what we're leaning toward is a procedurally generated for a lot of it, and then certain parts of it are kind of hand tweaked, which is probably how God made the universe.
Robin, is VR going to help or hurt with love?
I believe that it will help. But it's a responsibility that we all have as designers. When you build an experience and you put someone in a situation where they're doing violence to another form over and over and over, then that's the space that they're in when they leave that experience. When you put them into a space where they're, you know, really trying to relate to another human form, or maybe it's a dog, or maybe it's a horse, and you're a horse, and you're two horses running on the wind, you know, that kind of thing. Who knows? There are ways to unlock behavior towards each other that really come from the way that we think of embodiment. You know, in Journey, you're just a wisp of cloth, and the other person is a wisp of cloth, and you don't know who they are, you don't know where they came from. And in a way, I feel that by puppeteering your little character with that other person, you really do start to, you imbue that other person, your mirror neurons and all these other things that make you think things about that other person that may or may not be true, but they're generally positive. But it took a lot of design to make that positive. At the beginning of the game, we had resource structures in the game that made people want to compete with each other, and they would be racing through the game to get to resources. And we were like, what are we doing? We're supposed to be making people want to spend time together, and now they're just like, his scarf is longer than mine. How'd that happen? You know? Whoops. And so you just really have to work very hard to remove these drives that we have when we're out here and get people into a place where they can really empathize with one another. But I think it's totally groundbreaking, the technology itself, in terms of being able to connect with another person.
As someone who loves drums and rock band, I agree that I think you made the right choice to not try to wedge it in there until it's right. And with Eagle Flight, I played it yesterday, and it seems perfect for the gamepad. Like, it doesn't need touch wedged in there. You'll probably find a nice way to do it, but it's great. And then I played an early version of I Expect You to Die that had mouse control. And I really loved that. I thought it was perfect. It's an adventure game. But your game will also work good with touch. So when you think about those kind of control schemes, like, how do you think about supporting multiple control schemes? How do you think about, say, narrowing your vision and just focusing on one thing? Part of it is like the market share of these devices and what's new and novel. That seems like a really complicated conversation that people can have very conflicting opinions about. How have you guys approached that?
Well, I can jump in on that. Oh my God. Yeah, I'd have to go and do the math, but it wouldn't surprise me at all if a quarter of the budget that we spent on I Expect You to Die was about being able to handle multiple different control systems. Because that's the thing, that's the inner loop of the game. That's what you're doing all the time in the game. And we originally designed it for mouse because we started so early and there was no announcement about what the controller systems were going to be for the Oculus. And we reasoned that, well, everyone with a PC has a mouse. And we found a control scheme using the mouse that we thought worked great. And I couldn't believe no one else had ever done it. And to this day, I can't believe no one's copied it, which is fine. That's fine. Don't copy it. That's fine. And so it was working great for the mouse, and we got a lot of acclaim with that. And then when we had to switch to the touch, we thought, oh, this will be simple. It'll be the mouse, but better. And no, it was totally different. It was really, really different. I mean, and the mouse really enabled this business of telekinesis, that I could just reach across the room, and it was just something that hadn't been done before. And when we first did touch, we were talking to a lot of the Oculus engineers about, do you have thoughts about how we should adapt this? And so, some of the engineers were like, well, yeah, get rid of telekinesis. That doesn't exist in the real world. We're trying to make real hands. I'm like, okay, whoa. All right, hold up. No, that's very different. That's a totally different game you're talking about. So it just, we got there through, we ended up supporting, with one game, supporting all three, supporting mouse, supporting gamepad, and supporting two-handed touch controls. Because you get into things like, your puzzle solving totally changes when you have two hands. When you only have one hand, like, there's certain things you just wouldn't expect to be able to do. But once you can hold two objects, like, everything changes, and all these things become possible that weren't possible before. So so we got there just through, like, a lot of iteration and a lot of respect for the fact that you must get your controls perfect. And if you don't get your controls perfect, like, everything is gonna fall down. It is, I think, one of the harder things to do. It's not a light decision about which control system will we use or will we support multiple. It's a central decision.
Yeah, sorry, go.
I was just going to say that two-handed puzzle gameplay it's so fun. Like in Luna, if you're moving the stars around with both hands and you're twisting and untwisting them, it feels really great. But the current tutorial, which is in the demo now, is mostly assuming that people will use one hand or the other, because that's what we've seen in playtests. And I think we need to educate players about the opportunity to use two hands in VR and to use them at the same time. Because, you know, when you're dancing, you don't just put one hand in the air, you know? You use both. And like, it's your whole body is in it, but we're so used to using just the mouse hand, you know, and then occasionally the keyboard, and really getting people, or like you're holding a thing together with both hands, right? Getting people to realize the freedom of both hands is, I think, it's something that we can all participate in pushing that forward.
Control's tough. I mean, we're using touch with Rock Band, but there's no hands. Yeah. Because we have a touch controller on the guitar, and then you can't use the other one to strum because the ring gets in the way of the physical. It just doesn't work, right?
Yeah, it's tough. I think we're happy to be able to support such a broad variety of pre-existing Rock Band controllers and not put like another whole round of plastic into the world. But there are times when you're just like, oh, I wish that we had this additional button or these capacitive sensors here so we could represent like where people's fingers are before they push the buttons down. We've ultimately, I think, landed on a bunch of smart interactions that work, but there's still a bit of a learning curve to it, just to be able to you spend, I guess, maybe your first few minutes playing the game looking at the guitar a lot until you start to get comfortable with it and where your hand is on it. And that mirrors the process of getting good at guitar. But for us, the notion of strapping the touch onto the guitar just was so magical when it first happened. We're just like, okay, we clearly have to give people this experience. It's so awesome.
Whoa, a touch guitar. That was easy.
Yeah,
like it was, Did you experiment at all with touch or any other control spec for that matter for Eagle Flight?
Actually, we sort of did the opposite. When we started, we were trying to design for no controller at all, just to make the experience as accessible as possible. And then we realized it's way more fun when you can shoot other eagles. So we've had a lot of suggestions for using touch controllers. We have a lot of people come up to us and like, yeah, why don't you just flap your wings like this? And we're like, okay, have you tried that for longer than 10 seconds? Yeah, so right now, I think it's just that the gamepad is like the most accessible for everyone, considering like you can play multiplayer with one button. So
every time somebody says to me, "This is the right input for VR," I laugh. And this panel is a perfect example of why there is no perfect one, at least not yet.
Hi, my question is for Robin and Jesse. As regards the physical prototyping, when you went in there, were they preconceived volumes that you were looking for? And did the physical nature of reality limit the interactions and general play mechanics that you were devising?
For us, no. We definitely wanted to have a shape. I mean, the shape in Luna, we call it a space turnip. I don't know what it is. It's like a teardrop or a heart shape, kind of. It's a lotus flower. I don't know, something. But we knew that we wanted people to feel like they were transforming a space, and the idea of it being like almost like a clay potter's wheel in front of you that would spin around became the metaphor that we used, or like a turntable. We actually have had some controls in there that made it feel like, like a controlled turntable experience. But we definitely just figured, well, what's the cheapest way to prototype this? Let's just buy a bunch of toys that look like what we're building, and then use those at that scale. And Playmobil, seriously, it was perfect. It was the perfect thing. And I'm not gonna lie, I really wanted to buy a lot of Playmobil for the office. It's great to have it around. And we use physical prototyping, I should say, in all of the games that we make. So with Keita's game Watam, we use these little cubes and we stack them and use them. We buy a lot of stacking toys. Plan toys are also really good for us because they have a similar kind of quality. They're very simple, and they can be used in a variety of ways with each other. So over time, the toy box kind of becomes a series of affordances. But everything was about the scale of you sitting at a desk and playing with small toys, like Playmobil scale toys. I think that the limitations of it was just that we wanted to buy a lot of things to prototype with, and I just ended up going to the art store and buying pipe cleaners, various kinds of clay, paper clay, foam clay. There's like a bunch of different surfaces that you can use. And really, it was just kind of, there were so many options that just narrowing it down to the toys really helped, because when you have to sculpt the whole shape out and everything, it becomes a whole other art project and a little bit distracting.
Yeah, we're very used to physical design because we do interactive theme parks and museums and interactive toys, so we have some familiarity with it, but we really didn't find any. I mean, obviously it doesn't do everything, but it answers so many questions so quickly in terms of what is the player able to comprehend just by looking at what can people actually physically reach, because when you care about like what can they reach, you can tell that with cardboard. You don't need to get digital in order to tell it. So questions of reach, accessibility, comprehension, affordances, those questions can all be answered very easily. And then of course you got to use your imagination a little bit, but if you have a good dungeon master who's kind of leading them through it, a little imagination goes a long way.
God, there's so many. We have questions. Did either of you run into issues with different sized people? We talk about diversity. The climb had a huge problem with it because you've got a mountain with real people trying to climb it, and some people have to jump and some just reach up and it's easy. How do you solve that?
Well, I mean, so for I Expect You to Die, it's a seated experience, and one of the things I know from theme park design is, fortunately, seated experiences, most of us are very close to the same height when we're seated. Most of the difference is in your legs and you're standing. We did a game, Water Bears, that we did on the Vive as an experiment with room scale. That is a big problem because it turns out short people can't reach the puzzle. And we get these angry notes from parents who are saying, you know, my 7-year-old loves the game, but my arms are so tired from holding him up all the time so we can reach the top of the puzzle. Yeah, so you do have to think about these things, particularly if you're going to have a game that involves standing, it involves body space.
Yeah, we've actually, Luna's super popular with children, and I've had kids as young as 5 just go totally nuts about it. And the thing that we found is actually little people, one of the best things about smaller people is that they love to go underneath the puzzles and they love to go inside the world. So there's a lot of underwater exploration that happens in the terrarium, and they look inside the turtle's shell and they're like, what's that? And it's like, that's the inside of a model.
Rift headset is not recommended for anyone under 13.
Yeah,
Not to be
it's
used
true,
by anyone
it's
under
true.
13 under any circumstances.
It's true. However, they love it.
Hi, Jason. I have a question for you. As we know, China has the second largest game industry around the world, and there are a lot of game developers there who want to contribute to VR game landscape. But Oculus showed very little presence there. So, what is Oculus' strategy toward game developers in China?
Yeah, I'll answer briefly, but I do want to focus on the panelists. We definitely have a focus on China. We want to be there. There are challenges, and we're working our way through them. As far as developers go, you're more than welcome to reach out to us, and we can definitely work with developers. It's a little harder to be a consumer product right now, but we'll get there.
So when you're going through game development, you know, it's really hard to go from ideation, just your idea, to actual execution of your plan. And oftentimes you kind of work on a mechanic and it turns out it's not that fun, vice versa, where things are fun, but you can't time the
Take a shot at it.
So, so like I said before, our title basically started with an exploration of core mechanics, and then we ended up building the game around that. I think that we didn't lose sight of that core motion, but there's a lot of other stuff that comes afterwards, like how do you do anything that you would ever do in UI. If you're moving, you can't just put it static in the world. That's not going to work. So yeah, it's...
But you started with the idea of flying, and you ended up with shooting and mission-based stuff, and like her question, you definitely went through the entire process of finding something that worked, and then making it into a game.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. One of the things that we found really early on is that the more engaged your brain is, the less you're thinking about how comfortable you are. So we ended up starting out with multiplayer really early. Actually, that first prototype we sent to E3 2 years ago had multiplayer, and I would say that the core mechanics there are pretty much the same. And yeah, so from there, yeah, we did make a story mode afterwards because we're like, okay, well, we don't know how many people are going to be playing multiplayer online right now, so let's hedge our bets and give somebody an experience where they learn how to use the core controls, and yeah.
Last question. Oh, we have 32 seconds. Oh, no, we don't. Okay, we're done. Sorry.
No, from the back of the room.
So thank you, everybody. I really appreciate it. And I think we'll all be here for a few minutes if you want to ask another question in
Cheers.
private. Thanks.
Thank you.